Age of Empires 2 is a real-time strategy game developed by the now-defunct Ensemble Studios, developers of Age of Mythology and Halo Wars. Age of Empires 2 was published by Microsoft for Windows and OS X in 1999, later receiving a PAL Region PS2 port and a Nintendo DS spin-off. It was designed by Bruce Shelley, co-designer of the first Civilization game, which served as inspiration in multiple gameplay aspects. The title won DICE Computer Game of the Year in 1999, following the legacy of previous winners StarCraft and Half-Life. Age of Empires 2 not only reached the 4th highest sales of a video game in 1999, but maintained a spot in the top 20 for 2.5 years. The game went on to be cited as a major influence in a new generation of RTS games following the turn of the millennium, such as Rise of Nations and Empire Earth. Beyond its success in its 1999 release, Age of Empires 2 maintained a strong following for years to come, even beyond the disbandment of Ensemble Studios. Due to the love of fans and mod groups, the game stayed afloat and even received an HD remastered port to Steam in 2013, and now has 4 official expansion packs, released in 2000, 2013, 15, and 16. With the fan base still going strong after nearly 2 decades, it's time we take a look at what's so great about Age of Empires 2. Following the end of the ancient era of the first Age of Empires title, this sequel is set in the Middle Ages, spanning a 1,000-year time frame beginning in the Dark Ages and flowing through the High Medieval Ages and into the Renaissance. The base game started with 13 playable civilizations known for their strong presences in the medieval era. 5 historically based campaigns allow the player to take control of significant names from history, such as Joan of Arc in the 100 Years' War, or gave players command over the armies of Genghis Khan and Saladin. Included in the HD edition of the game is the Conquerors expansion pack, introducing 5 new civilizations known for their reputation as some of history's powerhouse cultures, such as the Mayans and the Huns. This included expansion also brings forward 4 new campaigns with several standalone scenarios of great battles throughout human history. It's also important to briefly mention the 3 following expansion packs: The Forgotten, African Kingdoms, and Rise of the Rajas, all of which contributed incredible amounts of new material in terms of civilizations, scenarios, campaigns, and stories. We like to avoid talking about downloadable content in this series, due to the fact that not everyone wants to purchase additional content, and it's important not to give a game excuses for releasing unfinished just to package the rest of the experience as bonus content. However, that isn't the case with Age of Empires 2. There is already so much to experience in the base game alone, and luckily, one of the expansion packs is included for free in the modern copy of the game. In fact, very few of the campaigns even have a completion rate higher than 3% by all players according to Steam leaderboards. The reason the DLC has to be brought up is to present the sheer mass of new stories and adventures to experience from an already full game. You don't even have to be a history buff to follow and enjoy the stories. Most reference material for the game was taken from children's sections at libraries so as to appeal more to players rather than researchers. For players who want to dive more into the backstory of the game they're playing, there is an optional page on the menu hosting a bounty of information on everything in the game, from the history of each civilization to an overview of medieval combat. Whether playing the base game campaigns, an expansion pack scenario, a generated skirmish, or a multiplayer war, there are all sorts of adventures to not only witness, but also create. Building off of the themes of both its predecessor and the standard real-time strategy formula, the majority of gameplay in Age of Empires 2 focuses on unit and resource management in a balance with timing and diplomacy. Players must balance sources and stockpiles of food, wood, gold, and stone to construct buildings, manage their population, build an army, and wage war with their enemies. While some competing RTS games have units or buildings that generate resources for you to collect over a set time frame, Age of Empires 2 has a much more strict amount of resources, most of which are finite and require detailed management to utilize effectively. In fact, the only object in the game to generate a steady stream of any resource without a trade-off is the relic item. But even those are hard to come across, very conservative in their earnings, and not even included in most matches. While the first Age of Empires entry laid the foundation for what the series was to become, the second title made several improvements on its gameplay formula. Critics praised the addition of new mechanics that vastly improved the lopsided gameplay issues of the first entry. AI became much better at strategizing and allocating their own resources, unlike the first Age of Empires where computer players were cited as being too easy to defeat. Even when not playing against human opponents, players must think and act decisively in order to compete with an admirable AI foe. Combat in the Age of Empires series is based around balancing your strengths and weaknesses with your army's size and mobility. Human units of infantry, archers, and cavalry generally follow a rock-paper-scissors structure when it comes to advantages in combat. Other units are fairly scaled in terms of how they fit into the grand schemes of military tactics, such as the monk. While being a powerful game changer if used effectively, it is also one of the most fragile units in the game. With the most common game type, the randomly generated scenario, players will have to stay on their toes and consider all of their actions and consequences in a fast-paced, multitasking-heavy game of wits and speed. Age of Empires 2 puts you in the shoes of a nearly omniscient commander. However, your knowledge stops with your soldiers and citizens. Only what is directly in their line of sight is visible at any point in time, even if you've seen other areas of the world around you. Fog of War limits the player to the knowledge of their soldiers and encourages exploration as well as player thought and memory. Of course, while you're out exploring, you better keep an eye on your home base in case any surprises occur. But don't worry, the ability to multitask grows with your skills as you experience more of the game. Matches may start slow, but pick up pace once you have multiple aspects to keep track of. As the game picks up, new players can be overwhelmed by the level of multitasking necessary as they reach the full game experience at the end of the tutorial, and must give full attention until it becomes more understandable. It takes a certain level of both attention and patience to become exceptionally fluid in your multitasking across the map. With Age of Empires taking place across very specific battles and events throughout history, it might feel as though you're about to be confined to much too specific a storyline. However, the developers had a different experience in mind. The game isn't about human history, but rather human experience, focusing on what we can do rather than what we've already done. Ensemble Studios wanted to break away from the bleak, dystopian sci-fi games of the time in favor of a more colorful historic game, taking the player to a place they wanted to be in rather than a place you wanted to escape from. Every civilization in this game offers something different. Depending on who you play as, you'll have access to that culture's specialized units and strengths based on the history of that civilization in real life. In fact, some countries flat out exclude certain military types in exchange for a boost in a different field. These slight modifications to the player's options create much more dynamic matchups between either players or AI, depending on your game mode. Age of Empires 2 requires you to advance your civilization at a realistic pace. It intertwines your focus on researching, building, and upgrading while focusing on the world around you, the status of your opponents, and the boosts available to your civilizations. Due to this level of involvement, any match can be wildly different depending on the playstyle of the players around you, providing a new experience every match. At the time of release, Age of Empires 2 was deemed one of the best looking RTSs at the turn of the millennium. Due to this game's high-def re-release, it's difficult to talk about how well it's aged because, of course, it still looks good on the new port. However, the reason for it looking as good as it does isn't just because it's shiny and new. Rather, what makes the game's visuals stand out and remain refreshing to longtime players is the attention to detail Ensemble Studios took in its development. Units, buildings, and even the heads-up display all change based on different criteria. Each civilization has architecture based on where in the world they're from, such as Western Europe, Southeast Asia, or Central America. In fact, each individual civilization has a designated wonder building based on a real building that is significant to that culture or region of the world. Beyond that, buildings also change with each age that a player progresses through, from shacks in the Dark Ages to ornate designs in the Imperial Age. And even more specifically, units will change visually to notate upgrades to their armor or other advances in research. Of course, these are all very enjoyable differences to look at as you progress through the game, but in a more technical sense, this incredible level of detail aids in fast-paced gameplay by being able to tell where your rivals are in terms of progression simply by looking at their buildings or units. The music of Age of Empires 2 was composed by Stephen Rippey, a recurring composer for Ensemble Studios productions. Rippey used instruments from the Middle Ages in his soundtrack to create authentic sounds designed to reflect aspects that would fit multiple civilizations. That way, no matter who you were playing as, the music wouldn't feel out of place. Outside of play, the music of cutscenes and pre-game slideshows of campaigns were based on themes from their respective characters' cultures to give an introduction to the world you were about to enter, such as bagpipes in the William Wallace tutorial campaign. The game is full of memorable music that fits every skirmish, no matter the civilization, point of progress, game type, or any other limiting factor. The atmosphere is constantly whimsical and fantastic without being overtly magical or over-exaggerated. Whether you're a medieval historian, an armchair general, or a seasoned gamer, there's plenty to enjoy within Age of Empires 2. With difficult, thoughtful single-player scenarios, and heated multiplayer battles, and even an in-depth map editor, all kinds of gamers can experience competitive or relaxed gameplay, depending on their choice. There are very few games that maintain substantial player counts for nearly 2 decades, and even fewer that still release new content for their die-hard fans. If the involvement of the fanbase itself helped to keep this game on its feet for so long, it must be pretty good, right? So, what's so great about Age of Empires 2? While many games of the time focused on New Millennium science fiction or escaping from a dark or otherwise unwelcoming environment, Age of Empires 2 invited players into a brighter world of medieval fantasy where the object was to literally stay there longer than anyone else. Even when it seemed the series would die off after the early disbandment of Ensemble Studios, the game rose to even greater success due to the love of its fans. It seems fitting that a game about standing the test of time had such a lasting impact on both its fans and the gaming world as a whole. That is what's so great about Age of Empires 2. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming, as we conquered the world in Age of Empires 2. If you have a favorite series or single game that you think is great, leave a comment of your choice and we'll look into it. If you feel there is something about Age of Empires 2 that didn't get enough attention, let us know. We'd love to discuss it with you. By the way, if you want to keep up with updates or hints about upcoming episodes, you can find us on Twitter at WSGA Gaming. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.